We are joined now by Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated. We are officially 2 weeks from the NFL draft, the first round. And I got to be honest, I love that the NFL now breaks it out. First round on Thursday, rounds 2 and 3 on Friday, and Saturday with the rest of the draft. I think it makes it so much more interesting to talk about after that first day, and also the excitement of all of those first-round picks getting an equal amount of attention, and just having those, I think, is really cool. I wasn't sure if I was going to like it when they made that change. Albert, what do you think about that? How do you assess, now that we've had a few years of this, the Thursday night first-round special?
It's great because, I think, and honestly, I was sort of a skeptic myself because my memories, and I think you're around the same age as me, were of watching the draft all day on Saturday, and I loved that when I was a kid.
That's right.
And then you get rounds 4 through 7 on Sunday. So I was actually skeptical about it because I really liked the old way of doing it because I had such great childhood memories of it. But it really is good, and I think one of the cool things about it is it sort of promotes more movement. And on Thursday night, you get teams trying to move up into the bottom of the first round because they can get fifth-year options on guys. And then, from a reporter's standpoint, what's really interesting about it is, on Friday now all of a sudden teams have a chance to kind of reset. And It's like, my God, this guy is still here. Do we go and get him? You know what I mean?
Yes.
I think you saw it last year there was a little run on running backs with, guys like DeAndre Swift, and if you remember, Clyde Edwards-Helaire came off the board at the end of Thursday night. And then all of a sudden, I think it was 3 or 4 running backs were off the board in the first 10 picks on Friday. So it's kind of cool to me that there's movement at the bottom of the round on Thursday because it's set up this way. And then on Friday, teams have all day to talk to each other about moving up, moving down. And, they really get a chance to kind of reset things. And again, I think for a lot of teams, there's those moments where it's my God, I can't believe that guy's still there. Let's see what we can do to go and get him.
All right, so let's talk. I mean, there is pretty much guaranteed 5 quarterbacks to go in the first round. A couple of years ago, we saw something that I kind of feel might become a trend, which is correct me if I'm wrong here, but under the existing contracts, I believe you get 4 years guaranteed for first-round picks, and then you get a 5th-year option, but only for first-rounders, right? Given where we are with quarterback value, we know that 5 guys, and I'm going to unpack those with you here in a bit, but we know 5 guys are going to go in the first round, maybe in the top 10. Are you buying into the idea that Kyle Trask or Kellen Mond may also be at play late in the first round, or would it severely surprise you if a team were willing to take one of those guys in the first round?
Yeah, I'd be surprised, Clay. I mean, I think we may have more day 2 quarterbacks than usual. I'd throw Davis Mills from Stanford into that group, too, as somebody who I think's intrigued a lot of teams. But I have a hard time seeing a 6th first-round quarterback sneak in there.
First time since 1983, I think, by the way, if that happened.
And I do think that there's a drop-off after the top 5. And you know what's so interesting about it, and you can go back and look this up, there aren't very many second-round quarterbacks over the course of the last 10, 15, 20 years. If you look at it, there are a ton of first-round quarterbacks and almost none in the second round. I mean, the number's really low. And you ask yourself why, and there are guys like Geno Smith, Christian Hackenberg. Well, it's actually kind of simple. It's either you think a guy is a franchise guy, and if you think he's a franchise guy, you're taking him in the first round, or you think a guy's a project or maybe a backup, a depth piece, whatever. And if that's the way you view a quarterback, then you probably aren't taking him in the second round, if that makes sense. I think what's unique and a little different about this year is you have the strength of the top at quarterback, but you also have the depth with some of these intriguing guys, which with a Mond, with a Trask, with a Davis Mills. Some teams are going to look at those guys as backups, and I think the question becomes: is there a team there, on the top of the second round that says it's worth taking a swing on this guy? Over a guy who, say, could be a starting receiver for you or a starting guard for you. That's what's so interesting about it, So I don't think it's going to be more than 5 quarterbacks in the first round. But you never know. Somebody could, at the end of the day, decide like we're going to take a guy in the second round, and why don't we just trade up to the bottom of the first round so we get the fifth-year option on him? That's what happened with Teddy Bridgewater in 2014. That's what happened with Lamar Jackson in 2018.
Okay, we know Trevor Lawrence is going 1. It seems pretty foregone conclusion Zach Wilson is going number 2.
Yeah.
Who do you ultimately think the 49ers are going to draft?
I've been saying, Mac Jones or Trey Lance, and now I'm like starting to doubt myself. I think Justin Fields might be in the mix. I do think that I will say this, like Mac Jones has a lot of qualities that Kyle Shanahan looks for in a quarterback. And, I think there's a perception out there at least that Kyle wants to run an offense like a video game. And so he wants a guy in there who is going to be able to run his offense as it's being called and who is going to, sort of color within the line, so to speak. And that's sort of the issue and has been the issue with Jimmy Garoppolo. You have the injuries, of course, and that is without question one of the problems. But another issue is that he freelances a little bit too much. And so, I think for those reasons, it's really easy to say, okay, like, is it Mac Jones? And I think Mac Jones is under consideration. But then you consider what that offense has been able to do in the past. And when you look at, like, the truly great quarterbacks who made that offense where it is, and I know we all focus on Matt Schaub, and we focus on Kirk Cousins, and we focus on Matt Ryan. But if you look back to Kyle's dad, Steve Young, John Elway. You know what I mean? Like, so, and then you start to look at guys in Trey Lance and Justin Fields that have like those sorts of traits, that have like Steve Young, John Elway traits. Now, I'm not saying they're as good as those guys, but just physical traits. They've got stuff that makes you think that way. So, I firmly believe this, and I've been told this by multiple people in that organization, that when they made that trade, one of the reasons they made that trade a month ahead of time is so they could go out and vet these guys, so they could go out and look at these guys, so they wouldn't have to sneak around, and there wouldn't have to be any sort of subterfuge about going and getting all the information they possibly could on all of them. And so, I can tell you Kyle thought going into the trade that there were 5 first-round quarterbacks. I can't tell you who he had ranked on top of who. But I do think that they really did genuinely want to go through the process because on one hand, you've got a guy in Mac Jones who does fit the offense, who does fit what they look for in a quarterback. But then you've got, Trey Lance and Justin Fields, who I think have the ability to supercharge it.
All right, so quarterbacks going third. Do you buy into the idea that the Falcons would take a quarterback, or are you convinced, as I am, at least at this point 2 weeks out, that they are locked in on the idea of Kyle Pitts? Not to say that if somebody wanted to trade up, they might not be willing to go back, but I believe if they draft at 4, they're taking Kyle Pitts. You buy that, or do you think the Falcons are doing something else?
I think it's in play. Like, I can tell you the discussion in that organization has sort of been about timelines.
Yeah.
Now, this makes sense. Like, I think, what you do with that pick is going to determine your timeline. They've renegotiated Matt Ryan's deal again, and they've pushed money forward. And where now, it had been where, all right, it would be difficult to get out of the deal after this year. I mean, now what they've done is made it difficult to get out of the deal even after next year.
Yeah.
So that tells you they're at least comfortable with Matt Ryan for the next few years. They aren't looking for an escape hatch. And I got to tell you, Clay, the thing is, you look at that roster, and there's no question, they need cheap young talent to fill it out. They need a lot of complementary pieces. But the top of that roster isn't bad. You know what I mean? Like, it's like there are a lot of first-round picks on the offensive line. You have Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley at receiver. On defense, you got guys like Grady Jarrett and Deion Jones. I just look at that roster. It's like if you put Kyle Pitts in the offense, now all of a sudden, I mean, Arthur Smith can win in year one. And so that's part of the discussion there is timelines. It's if you draft a young quarterback, now you're resetting a little bit, and you're probably going to detach from some of that core, and it's going to be a 3 or 4 year or 5 year process, and that could pay off doing it that way. Whereas, if you take Kyle Pitts, now you're okay. We're creating like a 2 or 3 year window for ourselves, and we believe we can win now. and I don't think it's a small thing. When you look at Terry Fontenot, the general manager there, look at what they did in New Orleans when they had that fantastic draft in 2017 and created a new window for themselves with guys like Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas and Marcus Williams and Ryan Ramczyk. They completely created a new window for themselves with one draft. I could see where, Terry Fontenot would say, we can do that here. We've got enough good players on hand where if we can add a few more pieces, we could be contending very, very soon.
Especially given, and it's wild to say, but 36, which I believe is Matt Ryan's age, it doesn't look that old relative to some of the other teams and what their quarterbacks have been capable of. Drew Brees, as you mentioned. We just had a Super Bowl winning quarterback in Tom Brady at 43. Aaron Rodgers just won MVP of the league at 37. Ben Roethlisberger certainly bounced back at, I believe, 38 and played at a fairly high level. And so if you think you got 2 or 3 years left of Matt Ryan, Kyle Pitts, I know you're a big college football fan too. Nobody could cover him in the SEC.
Yeah.
And if you have Julio Jones and you've got Calvin Ridley and you've got a pretty accurate passer in Matt Ryan, to me that trio offensively is pretty difficult to cover.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Kyle Pitts. Now, I will say, there are a lot of people that really like Jamar Chase in the league right now.
Yeah.
And I've talked to people who believe that Jamar Chase is the best non-quarterback in the draft. Here's the bottom line, though. It's too easy to find receivers now. They're everywhere. You know what I mean? If you look at the last 5 years and you compare the second-round receivers to the first-round receivers, there's almost no difference. You know what I mean? That's just the way it's played out. You don't have tight ends like Kyle Pitts come along too often. I've had people say he's the best tight end prospect since Vernon Davis. That was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think he could absolutely change what they are offensively already. What a nightmare they could be to defend if they draft him. It totally makes sense for me. And here's a detail too that I think is interesting. I can tell you Terry Fontenot went out of his way to meet with Matt Ryan early on, and we know how difficult these things are because of COVID now and all the rules and everything else. But he made a real effort to he went to an event. They have this complex that was opening on the Falcons property. He made a point of showing up at that event because he knew Matt Ryan was going to be there, and he's done a lot to try to relationship build with Matt Ryan, and I know Arthur Smith has too. And I don't know, Clay. If you're looking to move on from the guy, are you doing those things? You know what I mean? There's a lot of things there that tell you, they are very much considering going forward for the next couple of years with Matt Ryan. On the flip side, they have had the cavalry at all the big quarterback pro days, so that they're kicking the tires on those guys too.
We're talking to Albert Breer, Sports Illustrated NFL writer. Okay, unfortunately, this story you just can't escape. Last night, Tony Busby announces a 23rd woman has filed a lawsuit alleging that Deshaun Watson sexually assaulted her. And all of these women, to my knowledge, I haven't read all of the amended complaints, but he says in that statement that all of the women have now identified themselves. They aren't anonymously filing anymore for purposes of these lawsuits. What are you hearing from NFL people about the Texans' positioning with Deshaun Watson, about how the NFL is responding to this, and how you see it playing out, not from a legal perspective, but just from a Deshaun Watson quarterback perspective?
Yeah, I can't. And I think I've said this to you before. I think it's hard to have a take on it because, if you have a take on it or too hard to take on it, you're either indicting Watson, which I don't think is fair, or you're not taking the allegation seriously enough. The allegation should be taken very seriously, So, we'll see how that plays out. I can tell you, the Texans' tone on this thing has changed, and I don't know the exact point when it happened. It was over the last few weeks. I think if you called the Texans 5 or 6 weeks ago and asked them about trading Deshaun Watson, I know the response to other teams was, "You can ask us about anybody but the quarterback."
Yeah.
Now, if you call them now and you have something creative, hey, let's work out a deal and condition some picks, a 2022 pick, a 2023 pick that are conditioned on him playing, not being suspended, whatever. I think the Texans are listening now. I think the Texans, would be more than open to those sorts of things. The issue now becomes the Texans can't. It'd be really hard for them to move on from Deshaun Watson without getting a historic haul in return, because it's a 25-year-old franchise quarterback. And I don't know that any other franchise is going to have its owner, and I think that's an important point here, its owner sign off on doing that sort of thing until there's clarity on the legal situation. So I think the Texans are more open to it than they had been. And, I mean, I think because of that, whenever this thing gets settled, and we'll see what happens, if Deshaun Watson is cleared or if there's some settlement that allows him, to play football soon again, it does seem like the Texans might be more open to moving on than they were even a month ago. And I just think it's worth monitoring because, I mean, you got a law background. I wouldn't be surprised if there are people telling Deshaun, just do whatever you can to settle these cases now.
That's what I would be telling him. I mean, I talked about this earlier in the show, Albert. I said, look, if you asked me to put my lawyer hat on and I'm not considering anything other than representing my client and advising him in the best possible way that I could, you got to settle these cases. And you got to pay whatever the price is, could be tens of millions of dollars now, because if you don't, you may have criminal charges. You may take yourself out of being able to play for years. You may face time in prison. And so he is painted into such an awful legal corner that that's the only solution that I see for him at this time. You can't go to court for 23 different cases and try to defend yourself in a court in front of a jury. Some of those juries are going to find you responsible. All right, last question for you. NFL draft is 2 weeks away. Who are guys out there that you think can be instantaneous difference makers that our audience may not know in the first or early in the second round that you are hearing a lot of outstanding buzz about?
Yeah, there are a couple. One of them is kind of funny. I would not be surprised if the fourth receiver off the board is Elijah Moore from Ole Miss.
He's a stud.
And
I mean, he is a stud, yeah.
Now, people might know him best for his celebration in the Egg Bowl a couple of years ago.
Yeah, he's the one for people out there who have forgotten who raised his leg. But you know who he was emulating is A.J. Brown. And A.J. Brown may be a top 5 or 10 wide receiver in the NFL already. So, honestly, I actually look at the Titans at 22 as a potential destination for him because Corey Davis is gone. He has a good rapport with A.J. Brown. They need a slot receiver. But so you can explain why you're hearing good things about him.
So it wouldn't surprise me. It's just, I mean, it's one of those things where you start to ask around, and I was surprised to hear his name in front of, the Rashad Batemans, the Rondale Moores, and then it started to be like, could he be the fourth receiver off after the two Alabama guys and Chase? And then I started asking around more, and it's just like everybody I talk to loves him. You know what I mean? So he's one, absolutely. I think another surprise could be J.C. Horn, who is, the kid of Joe Horn. I wouldn't be totally stunned if he was the first corner off the board. Caleb Farley, who I think would have been the first corner otherwise out of Virginia Tech, he's got the back issue that's going to scare some teams off. Patrick Surtain's a really good player, really safe player, but there are questions about his ceiling. Whereas J.C. Horn and that's Joe Horn's son, corner from South Carolina, he's just a freakish athlete. Was a really good player to begin with and might have, more in his bag, so to speak. So J.C. Horn would be another one. And then, I think the guy that could go a little bit higher than people expect, that I haven't heard a lot on him, and maybe even in front of Micah Parsons, because there are, a few questions about makeup and character with him, is Zaven Collins, the linebacker from Tulsa, who is, I heard him compared to Tremaine Edmonds, who's obviously become a star with the Bills now. And the comp I got, which is sort of interesting, is he's big like Tremaine Edmonds, maybe not quite the freakish athlete, but his college tape is better than Tremaine Edmonds' college tape. So he's one that I've just sort of looked at and said, I didn't have him in my mock a couple weeks ago, and now I'm wondering if he could go in the late teens. So those would be three guys that I think I would say NFL teams think a little higher of than the general public. Elijah Moore, J.C. Horn, and Zaven Collins.
Man, I love the NFL draft, and I can't wait for 2 weeks from now when all this starts to come off the board and we find out exactly what's happening. Albert, I know how much you work. I know how busy you are. I appreciate the time, man. You're fantastic every time you come on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Clay.